This video was brought to you by Brilliant. One of the top priorities for Rishi Sunak upon entering number 10 was to simply remain there longer than his predecessor did. And in this regard, he has already succeeded. However, the fact that this was even a goal in the first place shows just how fractured the Tory Party is, and how brutal Tory MPs can be towards their leader. After all, they toppled their 2019 election winner,
but them's the breaks,
and then removed their next leader that was elected democratically by the membership after only just 49 days in office. Rishi Sunak might have lasted longer than the lettuce, but he's still presiding over a pretty significant polling deficit against Labour, and very few people truly believe that he could realistically win the next election. As such, some Tory MPs have already reportedly sent in no confidence votes to the chairman of the 1922 committee in an attempt to oust him. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the current polling, how this has been affected by recent scandals, why this is enraging Tory MPs, and whether this could cause them to oust yet another leader. So let's start by taking a look at the polling. As we pointed out many times before on this channel, the Tories have been behind in the polls ever since the beginning of 2022. Now, this was roughly when the Partygate scandal kicked off, and when the Owen Paterson scandal, the first of the major Tory MP scandals, also began. Back then, Labour were on average about 5 points ahead of the Tories, a number which only widened to 30 points when Liz Truss became Prime Minister, and has since contracted back down somewhere between 15 and 20 points since Rishi Sunak's premiership began. Now, zooming forward, at the beginning of September, according to Redfield Wilton polling, the Labour Party had a 16-point lead over the Tories. This week, though, Labour's lead has increased to 20 points. Now, one of the factors driving this decline in polling is the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete scandal. This all started back in August, following the collapse of a beam in a school, which saw more than 100 other schools closed, after the health and safety executive concluded that RAAC could collapse with little or no notice. Now, this caused two major issues for the government. Firstly, this scandal occurred right as children were going back to school after their summer holiday. Education has already been disrupted massively over the last few years thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, so this further disruption in a new school year has gone down particularly badly. But secondly, a view has developed that the Conservatives have had adequate warnings about the risk of RAAC and chose not to act on it. The argument is that this scandal was preventable and that the Tories failed to prevent it. And there's some truth in this too. As Chancellor, Rishi Sunak presided over a 41% annual reduction in school rebuilding programmes between 2019 and 2020. Additionally, an investigation by BBC News found that at least 13 schools affected by this concrete were set to be rebuilt by Labour, but were scrapped under the Tory-led coalition government. While this scandal can't be legitimately entirely blamed on Sunak, there are some legitimate arguments that the Conservatives didn't do enough to prevent it. Now, these two reasons have widely precipitated this 5-point widening between Sunak's Conservatives and Starmer's Labour. But it actually gets worse for Sunak, as the polling on government competence has actually worsened too. At the beginning of September, 21% more people thought that the government was incompetent than competent, but this has since increased to a 39-point gap. Perhaps the worst news for Sunak, though, is that his own personal approval rating is also dropping. At the beginning of September, it was already at a pretty terrible negative 12%, but this has dropped even further to negative 21%. The point here is that the Tories already had terrible polling, and that's only got worse thanks to the RAAC scandal. So it's reasonable to question then whether this worsening polling rating could affect Sunak's position as Prime Minister. Here in the UK, the leader of the largest party is invited to form a government by the monarch. As such, this individual can only be asked to become Prime Minister if they are the leader, and if they're ousted as leader, then they're also ousted as Prime Minister. This means that the largest political party has a lot of power, as they can effectively decide who becomes the Prime Minister and for how long. Right now, and for the last 13 years, the Conservatives have been in power, and have this privilege. So the only realistic way to get rid of Sunak is if Tory MPs decide that they want a new leader, and therefore a new Prime Minister. Now, there's actually already been a bit of movement on this. A couple of weeks ago, as Parliament resumed after their summer recess, there was talk from government insiders that some Tory MPs had submitted letters of no confidence in Rishi Sunak. And this is very important, because to trigger a formal vote of no confidence, at least 15% of Tory MPs need to pen such letters. But as the Tories currently have 352 MPs, this means that at least 53 letters will need to be written and submitted for this to happen. If that threshold were to be met, though, and if Sunak were to lose a subsequent no confidence vote, then a leadership election would be called. And the winner would automatically become Prime Minister, as happened with both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Now, right now, it's not clear how many of these letters have been written, although it's likely a very small number. And we can say that with some confidence because in the past, when votes of no confidence have been triggered, there's been huge amounts of speculation in the days beforehand about when the threshold will be breached. Right now, though, we only have a single report, so it seems reasonable to assume that very few letters have actually been sent in. And to be fair, this is sort of understandable. While Sunak isn't doing particularly well and is on track for an overwhelming defeat at the next general election, replacing him would likely only make things worse for the Tories. The Conservatives' reputation is currently in tatters thanks to the short-lived Truss premiership and the various scandals of the Johnson government. In fact, the Tory Party was close to tearing itself apart in both cases, and one of the things that Sunak was tasked with as a leader is healing that divide. Sure, he might not be presiding over particularly good polling, but given the chaos that immediately preceded his premiership, it's doubtful that many people could have actually dragged Tory polling back above Labour. And while anyone would have failed at that, he has largely succeeded in stopping the public blue-on-blue infighting, which is certainly a good thing. Replacing him, though, would only restart this fighting and make the Conservative Party look even less electable to a general public that already don't view them all that favourable. As grim as it may be for Tory MPs then, the question they might be asking themselves right now is whether it's worth toppling Sunak and installing a new Prime Minister if the best case outcome is slightly improved polling and the worst case outcome is total oblivion at the next general election. And as such, many Tory MPs might conclude that it just isn't worth doing it all over again. So, despite his worsening polling, Rishi Sunak is almost certainly safe to fight another day, and then go on to fight in his first, and if the polls are to be believed, last general election as Prime Minister. Now, you just spent around 8 minutes watching a video to help you learn more about the world around you, and that feels good, right? Well, that's the feeling you get from spending time learning and bettering yourself. And if you want to do this more, then we have good news. Long-term sponsor of the channel, Brilliant, are giving the first 200 people who click our link 20% off their annual premium subscription. Now, Brilliant is an interactive online learning platform which is full of all kinds of courses which can help you improve your career and further your understanding of the world. They have more than 100 courses on everything from predicting with probability to how technology works to the concept of infinity. And these may sound like topics you need to dedicate a lot of your time to, but you really don't. With Brilliant, you can master big concepts in as little as 15 minutes a day, and you can do this anywhere, anytime. You can find our link in the description to get that special offer. And as always, thanks for watching, and thank you to Brilliant for supporting TLDR.